Hello, it's JP, and welcome to
Game Off. Nerd!
Now. Thanks everybody for joining me. It's 2024. I had my goals video just dropped a few weeks back, and what I talked about in that video was one particular comic that I wanted to pick up. But the other part of that goals of 2024 was to continue to hunt for comics, and as Mike says, strange and unusual places. And I'm going to come up with my own slogan, and somebody like McDonald's and Burger King, Mike and myself, in regard to our little slogans on that. But strange and unusual places is a great way to phrase that, because it's a thrill of the hunt. It's just fun finding things that you don't normally see or things that are hard to find, whether it be the Hulk 377 that I had found last year, the Amazing Spider-Man 607, the Jake Scott Campbell cover, Showcase 79, Captain Britain. Those are some of the cooler books I found throughout the year. So we're going to start off this year with, I finally have a local comic shop. It's an antique store that a friend of mine bought that is full of long boxes, which I showed in a recent video of some of the books that he had given to me, or some of the ones I bought from him based on me helping him out with going through those long boxes. So I have a place to go at lunchtime when he's open, and I can walk to it, so it's great. But I have a comic store away from home, and this is Comics 101, and a town about an hour away from me. And this guy is super nice, and he has a great selection of wall books, we'll call them, in his antique store. And then he has a bunch of dollar bin books that I go through quite frequently when I'm in town. And I was there for a basketball game. I wasn't playing, of course, but my kids were playing, so I was there to watch my kids. And so when I had some time, I stopped by, looked through. I had about 40 minutes, which is plenty of time for me to hunt. So I stopped by, and let's get right into what I found. Again, this is not in the greatest shape. This is not my favorite artist, Mr. Jack Kirby, as you all know, but I figured, what the heck, for $1, I'll grab it. Devil Dinosaur #1, first appearance of Devil Dinosaur. Interesting book, beat up beyond, but again, one of my goals for this year that I didn't mention in the video is of my goals video is that I'm going to read more comics this year. I'm going to be a reader now and not much of a key collector. That's a joke. I'm going to read some of the better storylines that I've heard so much about throughout this last couple years. And what compels me are great storylines, darker storylines. So this next book I found is definitely one I'm going to read, and this is Green Lantern 54. Now, I have the first appearance of Kyle Rayner and Green Lantern. I think it's 49, 50, 51, and 52 is the set of his first appearance, and some key books in the Green Lantern Volume 2 run. This one doesn't have a ton of value, but when I heard the synopsis for this book, I wanted to find it. And you can see in the background, looks like the girl laying on the ground back here. And this is Kyle Rayner's girlfriend. This is Major Force, the villain in this particular issue. And this guy is a homicidal maniac from what I gather. And what he has done, as Kyle Rayner was off saving somebody, he goes to Kyle Rayner's home to find him, and his girlfriend's there. Kyle Rayner's girlfriend is there, and he proceeds to beat her to death. And then he, essentially stuffs her in the freezer in pieces. And Kyle Rayner finds her in the freezer, and then goes crazy, and then just beats this guy almost to death. And I don't blame him for that, but that just sounds like such a dark storyline for Green Lantern, that I wanted to find this. And, I could have bought it on eBay. I'm sure it's an easy find, but I did find it at my now away from home local comic shop. So happy to have that. Next one is going to be Amazing Spider-Man 275. I am a fan of the Black Suit Spider-Man. Hobgoblin was my second favorite villain of the 90s. So I'm happy to grab this one. It's in decent shape. Origin of Spider-Man Retold. So when you find it in a dollar bin and the book's actually worth some $20 or so, I'll gladly pick it up for that little bit of margin there. Next two, again, go back to dark storylines. And this is going to be, I already have probably the best cover of this particular 6-part series. This is the Spider-Man, the Craven series for Amazing Spider-Man. It went through Amazing Spider-Man, I think Spectacular Spider-Man, and Web of Spider-Man. But this is part 2, Amazing Spider-Man 293, Mike Zeck cover, part 2 of this series, but a great newsstand copy, well drawn, and that's why I love this particular cover. But I want to collect all 6 and read this particular story because I heard it's quite dark. The next one is the kickoff of this series, and this is Web of Spider-Man number 31. Cool cover here, almost as good as the cover, which is I think Web of Spider-Man 33, where he's actually coming out of the grave, and that is an iconic Mike Zeck cover from the 80s. But this one is pretty cool too. So happy to pick that one up. Not in the greatest shape, but again, I want to start reading more books, reading more of these storylines, and so that's one I grabbed. This next one here is Captain America 307. I thought it might have some significance for our Marvel Series 3 contest. Kind of reminded me of the Taskmaster cover, but this is Mad Cap, I think, is his first appearance. I don't think he may be in. I think he may be in the Series 3 card. We'll see. But for $1, I'm going to grab all the first appearances I can find. When the cover looks familiar to me, and I look it up on Key Collector, if it is a first appearance, it's cheap, I'm going to grab it. So I picked that one up. The last one from my comic shop away from home is Spidey Super Stories from the 70s. Now, this is the first and only appearance of Webman, who is the alter ego of Spider-Man. He is like the Bizarro Spider-Man. He's not the first clone of Spider-Man. I don't know. I didn't read the storyline yet to see if he is a clone, but he's not the first clone. As many of you know, Ben Reilly is Spider-Man's first clone, and that was in Amazing Spider-Man 169, I think it was, or 139, where Ben Reilly becomes the first clone of Spider-Man. So this book came after that by about, I think, 2 years. So it's not the first clone, but it's definitely the first appearance of Webman and the only appearance of Webman. So I think it's kind of neat to look at what if Spider-Man was actually, that was his color scheme. Would we have liked Spider-Man as much? Would have made a difference? I don't know. Kind of cool to see him in a different light there. And also with our Dr. Doom here on the cover. So book I've seen around, knew about, and was happy to find at my comic shop away from home. So a couple I picked up that I thought were pretty neat, and I think I spent about $30 for all of them. So the majority of it came just from this Spidey book here. He had it for $20, so glad to have that. So the next thing I'm going to show you is what my goal for 2024 was, and that was one particular book, and that book was The Crow #1. And I didn't know if I would find it in raw or graded form. It's a book that I didn't know existed when I collected in the 90s, but I well knew the movie. I was a fan of Brandon Lee. I was a huge fan of Bruce Lee. And the background of the tragedy that it happened to both Bruce and to Brandon made The Crow a cult classic. The music in that particular movie was, just emanated the 1990s. And for all this time, I thought that Crow movie was set in Seattle just because it rained. So no offense to anyone that lives in Seattle, but I remember always hearing Seattle rained. But it did have the grunge scene. That's where Nirvana, Pearl Jam all came from. And so because Brandon Lee was portrayed as a rocker in this movie, I thought it was Seattle. But after talking to Brandon from Mon Comics, it's Detroit. And Detroit was the apocalyptic city as as the 80s and 90s. It was, Beverly Hills Cop was set in Detroit early on, where he came from, where he cut his teeth and all the crime there. RoboCop was a reiteration of old Detroit, trying to make it better. And so was the storyline for The Crow. And I thought that was pretty neat because it didn't have that look. It was just always look. Recently watched the movie. I ordered a book which had the whole compilation of the first, I think it's the first 4. I think the Crow series itself was 4 to 6 issues. So I picked that book up because, again, I want to read more of these backstories to know more of them. So on New Year's Day, I had flagged a particular eBay auction for a book, and I'd flagged it a couple days prior. And on New Year's Day, the auction was ending, and I won it. And I was kind of surprised that I thought I would get, you know, beat out on the last day, and I was able to win the auction for this book. And you know what it is. I've already hinted on it. And it came in a square box and laid in here in an angle. Okay. Now I've seen some. I've had graded comics arrive to me in a Little Caesars pizza box, and I didn't give a bad review. I just was happy it wasn't damaged and it didn't have grease on it, and so I give credit for the ingenuity. This was sort of. I think the person hasn't sold much on eBay, and the book arrived. It didn't even move in this box. It was angled in there, so it couldn't move with this amount of packing he put on it. So I appreciate that. But, my one review of him, and I didn't leave a negative one, I wouldn't do that to somebody, was maybe just to use a priority mailer for a comic like this, because this was not a cheap book. But again, 2024 goal met. The Crow #1. If I had a soundboard, I would have a clapping going on and yay, where'd he go? Type stuff. So again, this is not a huge grail in regard to Fantastic Four 1 or Amazing Fantasy 15, but it is one that you don't see very often. And I think there's 68 copies in 9.8 on the census for this particular book. So there's not a ton in such high grade because it's a black cover. This one is creamed off white pages. They didn't use high grade paper back then. Black cover. It's iconic, just an awesome cover back in the day. And so it's hard to find these in high grade. So the fact that I have it in a graded version, it's a mid grade first print. Again, all those made me want to jump on this one. And I think I got it for about 100 or 200 off of what fair market value was. So just happy to have it, display it. As I started reading more into it, I realized that James O'Barr came up with the idea for The Crow based on a tragedy that happened to him. He had a girl that he cared very much for. Didn't say that they were dating or they were boyfriend and girlfriend like Eric and Shelley in the story, but it alluded to that. But essentially what happened was this girl was a great friend, girlfriend, I'm not sure, but he cared much for her. And his car wasn't working. They must have been out of college or in college, and money was tight and he couldn't get his car to start, and he called her. He could have taken the bus. He could have called somebody else, but he called her to come pick him up. And as she was getting in her car, she was run over by a drunk driver and killed. And that pain is what drove him to write the Crow movie. Now, it's a tragedy in itself, and it's a violent tragedy. But what his anger was is why things happen the way they do. Why do good people get taken from us early? And that's what the Crow is supposed to avenge, those wrongs that occurred. And so he portrayed a different tragedy in the movie, in the comic books, which I'm currently reading. But he definitely wanted some vengeance to the world, I guess, for what happened to good people. For the people that do bad things, they should be, there should be some type of penance or payment for what they've done. And that's what The Crow was supposed to do. And the movie's great. It's a cult classic. The comic book is great. The read is awesome so far. The cover of this book is just iconic. Again, let me just bring it back out one more time. I mean, it's just a fabulous cover. I know this is not his first appearance, but this is the first appearance is a money book, but this one is the one to have as a Crow fan. So happy to meet my goals for the year already. I will continue to look for comics in, as Mike says, strange and unusual places. But again, I'm going to keep reading more of these comics. That's the new goal for this 2024 year. And I've started already because I'm halfway through the Crow book, and really understanding what what compelled James O'Barr back in 1981 and then in the 90s to finish that storyline. So tell me what you think of my pickups. Tell me what you think of the Crow. And make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. So I will see everyone on the next unboxing, interview, or just show off video. Peace out, everybody. Have a great 2024.